Every single day before any shots are fired, somewhere between 100 and 230 ships squeeze through a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman. That's the Strait of Hormuz, and roughly 20% of all the oil traded on the planet passes through it. Now imagine Iran wakes up one morning and says this strait is closed. No ship linked to any enemy nation gets through. The knee-jerk reaction is obvious. The United States Navy, the most powerful naval force in human history, will just force it open. Send in the destroyers, launch the jets, problem solved. Right? Not even close. Here's the math that keeps Pentagon planners up at night. Even if the US intercepts 90% of every threat Iran throws at those ships, that still means a few tankers get hit every single day. And the moment that happens, shipping companies pull out. Insurance premiums go through the roof. Captains refuse to sail. You don't need to sink a fleet to shut down a strait. You just need to make the journey not worth the risk. And this isn't some wild hypothetical pulled from thin air. It's already happened twice. During the tanker war in the 1980s, Iran and Iraq attacked over 500 commercial ships in the Gulf over 8 years. The U.S. Navy launched Operation Earnest Will, the largest naval convoy operation since World War II, to escort Kuwaiti tankers through the strait. Even with that massive commitment, ships still got hit. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, a Navy frigate, struck an Iranian mine and nearly broke in half. The operation worked barely, but it took enormous resources against an Iran that was already exhausted from fighting Iraq. Fast forward to 2019. Iran attacked 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman with limpet mines, magnetic charges attached directly to the hulls. Within hours, insurance rates for Gulf shipping spiked by over 10%. Imagine what happens when Iran isn't just sending a message, but actually trying to shut the whole thing down. So how exactly would Iran pull this off? And why is the world's most advanced military staring down a problem it might not be able to solve? Let's start with geography, because geography is doing most of Iran's work for them. The Persian Gulf is not the open ocean, it's shallow. In many places, painfully shallow. Large oil tankers, the kind hauling millions of barrels, need anywhere from 50 to 80 feet of water beneath their hull just to stay afloat. That means they can't zigzag. They can't take evasive routes. They're locked into narrow shipping lanes like trucks on a single-lane highway with no shoulder and no exits. And those lanes run directly past Iranian-controlled territory. We're talking islands like Keshem Larak Abu Musa and Siri, some of them just a handful of miles from the shipping corridor. Picture driving down a highway where every hilltop on both sides belongs to someone who wants to shoot at you. That's what transiting the Strait of Hormuz looks like when Iran decides it's done playing nice. Now let's talk about what Iran actually has sitting on those hilltops and tucked into those valleys and hidden inside those caves. First up, anti-ship missiles. Iran has developed a whole family of compact truck-launched cruise missiles, weapons like the Nasr and the Kawsar. These aren't massive ship-killing behemoths you'd see on a destroyer. They're small. They fly at high subsonic speeds, just under the speed of sound, hugging the surface of the water. They're hard to spot on radar and harder to shoot down. The launchers, they fit on the back of a regular military truck, drive to a hidden position behind a ridge fire, relocate in minutes. Good luck finding them before the next salvo. Then come the drones. Iran has invested heavily in kamikaze drones, the Shahed family being the most well-known. These are essentially flying bombs. They're slow compared to missiles, but they're cheap. They come in swarms and they don't need a runway. You can launch dozens of them from a single position. Mix those in with explosive-laden unmanned speedboats, small, fast, remote-controlled craft that blend right in with the hundreds of fishing boats and civilian vessels already clogging the Gulf, and suddenly every blip on the radar screen is a potential threat. But the nastiest part of Iran's toolkit is underwater. Iran reportedly has upward of 5,000 sea mines. And if that number sounds abstract, consider this: during the entire tanker war in the 1980s, Iran laid only about 150 mines, and those still managed to damage multiple ships, including a U.S. Navy warship. 5,000 mines in the shallow, narrow waters of the Gulf would turn the entire strait into an underwater obstacle course that could take months to clear. These aren't rusty barrels floating on the surface either. Modern mines can sit on the seabed for months waiting for the acoustic or magnetic signature of a specific type of ship before detonating. Clearing a minefield takes time, specialized ships, and enormous patience. And while you're clearing nobody's sailing through, on top of that, Iran operates small submarine torpedo boats, the Ghadir-class being the best known. These things are tiny, fast, and terrifying. They can approach on the surface at up to 50 knots, that's about 57 miles per hour, then submerge, creep close, and fire lightweight torpedoes designed to detonate right at a ship's waterline. In the shallow, cluttered waters of the Gulf, hunting these boats with sonar is like trying to hear a single whisper in a packed football stadium on game day. And here's the kicker: how Iran finds its targets in the first place. You'd assume they rely on radar, right? Big radar installations that the US could jam or blow up on day one. But Iran doesn't need radar. The Iranian coastline along the strait features mountains that rise to around 4,000 feet. From those peaks, soldiers with handheld thermal imaging devices, basically high-end heat vision binoculars, can visually identify and classify ships from over 20 miles away. No radar emissions, no electronic signature for the US to detect or jam. Just a guy on a mountaintop with a pair of fancy binoculars calling in coordinates to a missile truck parked in a valley below. You can't hack binoculars, you can't jam a pair of eyes. And you'd need to physically clear every single mountaintop along hundreds of miles of coastline to shut it down. That's the threat picture. Now let's look at what it takes to defend against it. And this is where things go from bad to mathematically insane. The shipping route from Kuwait at the northern end of the Gulf all the way down and out through the Strait of Hormuz into the Gulf of Oman covers roughly 1,000 miles. That's the distance from New York City to Miami. Every single mile of that route is within range of something Iran can throw at a ship. To protect convoys along that route, the US Navy would need to provide constant escort coverage. Here's the problem: anti-ship missiles and kamikaze drones fly low, often just a few dozen feet above the water. At that altitude, the curvature of the Earth limits how far a ship's radar can see. Even the most advanced destroyer in the US fleet, the Ghadir-class, equipped with the powerful spy radar system that can track hundreds of targets simultaneously, can only detect a sea-skimming drone at maybe 15 to 20 miles. That's roughly 60 to 90 seconds of warning before impact. 60 seconds. That's less time than it takes to microwave a bag of popcorn. To maintain a continuous radar umbrella along the entire 1,000-mile route, covering every possible angle of attack, the Navy would need somewhere between 15 and 20 Ghadir-class destroyers on station at all times. Not 15 to 20, total 15 to 20 actively patrolling right now this minute. Factor in crew, rest maintenance, refueling, and rotation, and you're looking at committing the majority of the entire US destroyer fleet to a single mission in a single body of water for one strait, while the rest of the world's oceans go uncovered. But ships alone aren't enough. You need eyes in the sky. To maintain a 24/7 combat air patrol fighter jets circling above the convoys around the clock, ready to intercept threats. The moment they appear, you need a constant rotation of aircraft. Pilots can only fly so many hours before exhaustion sets in. Jets need fuel maintenance and weapon reloads. To keep just a handful of fighters airborne continuously over the length of the Gulf, the US would need an operational pool of roughly 300 fighter jets dedicated exclusively to this escort mission. Let that sink in. 300 jets. Just for escort duty. That's more combat aircraft than the entire US military currently has deployed across the entire Middle East. So where do they come from? Do you pull them from Europe and weaken NATO, strip them from the Pacific and hand China an open window, bring them from stateside bases and leave the homeland with reduced air defenses? Every jet you send to the Gulf is a jet you're taking from somewhere else. There's no magic reserve. And even if you could somehow conjure up that many ships and planes, there's a problem that might be even worse than the logistics: your tax dollars. A Ghadir-class destroyer carries 96 vertical launch cells, basically 96 ready-to-fire missile slots built into the deck. Those cells are loaded with some of the most advanced and expensive interceptor missiles on the planet. An SM-6, the Navy's primary long-range interceptor, costs around $4 million per shot. The shorter-range ESSM, the evolved Sea Sparrow missile designed for closer threats, runs cheaper, but you burn through them fast when dozens of drones are inbound simultaneously. Now think about what you're shooting at. A Shahed kamikaze drone costs Iran maybe $20,000 to $50,000 to build. You're spending $4 million taxpayer dollars to destroy something that costs less than a new Ford F-150. Do that 100 times a day, and the US is burning through $400 million in missiles daily. That's roughly what the federal government spends on school lunch programs for an entire year. Gone. Every single day. To swat down drones made from lawnmower engines and plywood. And every missile you fire in the Gulf is a missile you don't have if things go sideways with China in the Pacific, which is where the Pentagon actually wants those weapons. The US military has been stockpiling high-end interceptors specifically for a potential Pacific conflict. Burning through that stockpile in the Gulf would leave the Navy dangerously underarmed for the fight it considers its #1 priority. Even the backup option is ugly. Each destroyer has a 5-inch deck gun, a 127mm cannon that can engage surface targets and in theory shoot down drones. But at 2 to 3 miles of effective range against a small moving target, the drone is practically on top of you before the gun can engage. That's not air defense. That's a Hail Mary, so you're burning through multi-million-dollar missiles to swat cheap drones, draining the fleet's weapons magazines faster than they can be resupplied, tying up the bulk of America's naval combat power in one body of water, and doing all of it on the American taxpayer's dime at a rate that would make your head spin. This is what military strategists call cost asymmetry, and it's a fight the US loses even when it wins. So what actually happens to the global economy while all this is playing out, the moment the first tanker gets hit, or even the moment Iran credibly threatens to hit one insurance company's react? And we've already seen the preview in 2019 after just 2 tanker attacks. War risk insurance premiums for Gulf shipping jumped tenfold overnight. Now multiply that by a sustained full-scale blockade. War risk premiums would spike from a fraction of a percent of the ship's value to potentially 10, 15, even 20%. For a supertanker carrying $200 million worth of crude oil, that means an insurance bill of $20 to $40 million for a single voyage. No shipping company on Earth is paying that. Shipping companies start rerouting or simply refusing to send ships. Oil flow through the strait drops from 20+ million barrels a day to a trickle. Global oil prices don't just go up, they explode. We're talking potential spikes to $200, maybe $300 a barrel. Gas prices at your local station could triple overnight from $3.50 a gallon to north of $10. Every economy on Earth that depends on Gulf oil, and that's most of them, takes a sledgehammer to the gut. Stock markets crater. Supply chains that were already fragile snap completely, and the pain isn't limited to oil. The Gulf states also export massive quantities of liquefied natural gas, petrochemicals, and other commodities. All of it stops. The entire global economy starts choking, and every day the strait stays closed, it gets worse. So what does the US actually do? Because at this point, the purely defensive approach escorting convoys through 1,000 miles of hostile water is clearly not sustainable. The cost is too high, the logistics are too demanding, and Iran can keep firing cheap weapons faster than the US can shoot them down. The answer almost inevitably is offense. The US would have no realistic choice but to launch a massive sustained air campaign deep into Iranian territory. The goal: systematically destroy every missile launcher, every drone launch site, every mine-laying capability, every observation post on those coastal mountains, every command bunker, and every naval base that supports Iran's denial strategy. This is not a quick strike, not a one night of Tomahawk missiles and it's over scenario. Iran has spent decades and learned hard lessons from watching the US dismantle Iraq's military, twice dispersing, hardening, and hiding its assets. Mobile missile launchers move constantly along pre-planned routes through mountain valleys. Underground facilities are buried hundreds of feet inside solid rock. Decoys and dummy positions are everywhere. Iran's military planners watched what happened to Saddam Hussein's forces and essentially built their entire defensive strategy around the question, how do we survive an American air campaign Hunting all of it down would take weeks, possibly months of sustained bombing. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the trillion-dollar bat-winged aircraft that can fly from bases in Missouri, drop precision-guided bombs and return without ever being detected, would be running missions around the clock. Carrier-based strike fighters would be launching sorties continuously from at least 2, probably 3 carrier strike groups positioned in the Arabian Sea. Hundreds of land-based jets would be flying from Allied bases in Qatar, Bahrain, the UAE, and possibly Saudi Arabia, assuming those nations agree to host the operations, which is far from guaranteed given the risk of Iranian retaliation against their own territory. What started as Iran closing a strait just became a full-scale regional war. And the moment bombs start falling on Iranian soil, the ripple effects go global. China gets 40% of its oil imports from the Gulf. Beijing would be watching this unfold with a mix of fury and calculation. A prolonged closure doesn't just hurt China's economy, it validates everything Chinese strategists have been warning about for years, that America can choke China's energy lifeline whenever it wants. That accelerates Chinese investment in alternative routes, strategic petroleum reserves, and most dangerously, military capabilities designed to challenge the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. A war in the Gulf could ironically make the Pacific more volatile, not less. India, which imports over 80% of its oil and gets a huge chunk of it from the Gulf, faces an immediate economic crisis. Rising fuel costs ripple through an economy where hundreds of millions of people live close to the poverty line. Political pressure to act or at least to loudly oppose the conflict would be enormous. European NATO allies would face a brutal choice: support the U.S. operation and risk their own economic pain from skyrocketing energy prices, or distance themselves and damage the alliance. Russia, still a major oil and gas exporter, would be one of the few countries that actually benefits from the chaos pocketing windfall energy profits while its geopolitical rivals bleed. The entire global order gets reshuffled, alliances get tested, and the longer it goes on, the more permanent the damage becomes. And that's the fundamental trap, the one Iran has been building toward for decades. Iran knows it can't win a conventional war against the United States. Its air force is flying jets from the 1970s. Its navy would be swept from the surface in days. In a straight-up fight, there is no contest. But Iran has never planned for a straight-up fight. Iran's entire strategy is built around a single idea: make the cost of confrontation so catastrophically high that no rational actor would choose it. 5,000 mines in a shallow strait, thousands of cheap missiles and drones hidden in mountains, submarine boats lurking in cluttered waters, observation posts that can't be jammed, and the knowledge that every single day the strait stays closed, the global economy hemorrhages billions of dollars. The U.S. isn't facing a military problem. It's facing an economic hostage situation with a military wrapper. Opening the Strait of Hormuz permanently wouldn't mean sending a carrier group and declaring the mission accomplished in a week. It would mean committing to a sustained multi-month air war against a nation of 88 million people dug into some of the most defensible terrain on the planet: mountain ranges, underground bunkers, thousands of miles of coastline. It would mean burning through missile stockpiles the Pentagon has been carefully building for a potential war with China. It would mean absorbing the economic shock of triple-digit oil prices while simultaneously paying for the most expensive air campaign since the invasion of Iraq. And it would mean managing the political fallout from a war that would reshape alliances, destabilize the Middle East even further, and hand strategic gifts to every adversary watching from the sidelines. All because of a 30-mile wide strip of water that happens to sit between two mountain ranges right next to a country that spent 40 years figuring out exactly how to make it ungovernable. That's not a scenario anyone in Washington wants, but it's the scenario Iran has made sure they can't ignore. And remember, we talk about hypothetical wars, but only real peace can truly bring us together.